All right. Thank you again for tuning into another live stream show. Today, our guest is Mark Metry, and Mark was actually a guest back on episode 19, and he's got an awesome podcast called Humans 2.0, and he really just takes people from level 1.0 and levels them up to their 2.0 versions of themselves. And he recently just launched a book, which is very aligned with our podcast here about why you should start sharing. And his book is called Screw Being Shy, and he just took just announced it and is live with it. So definitely go to Amazon and purchase that. But Mark,
Thanks.
thanks for taking the time today to jump on the show.
Dude, of course, man. Thanks for having me back on again, and thanks for grabbing and maybe reading the book.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I picked the book up, so it should be coming. Assuming Amazon fulfills orders right now on a timely
Nah,
manner.
everything is delayed. I think they're delaying everything except non-essentials by like 1 to 2 weeks. So, you know, I hope people out there are getting the right kinds of supplies like baby food and essentials over my book. So it's all good.
Yeah,
But it's
yeah,
quite a time to launch a book though. So it's interesting.
it is very interesting. Yeah, the coronavirus obviously is affecting a lot. So for those that aren't familiar, can you give us a quick spiel about your brand and what your mission is all about?
Yeah, so I'm 22 years old, live on the East Coast. Basically dedicated my entire life towards human potential, freedom, transformation, mental health because I'm an entrepreneur and I've had a ton of money in my bank account, but I've still been depressed. I grew up with a long history of social anxiety, and today I host Humans 2.0 Top 100 podcast. I am on an Amazon Prime documentary series. I'm a speaker. Well, not right now, but I'm a speaker in general. Um, I sit on the board of a nonprofit called Parachute Bridge that's helping kids out with education. And yeah, I mean, I do a lot, but ultimately, I think everything I do kind of goes with that through line of like, I'm just trying to make the world a better place by trying to help people solve their issues like I once had. And a major part of that for me is mental health, social anxiety, um, really just kind of understanding the human body, mind, system, spirituality to help people get out of the hole that I was once in.
Awesome. Yeah, you've got a really awesome mission. I appreciate the work that you do. So
Thanks.
last time you were on the show, you talked about how your world feels like you're in an unstoppable hurricane. Like you're giving you're posting podcasts, you're getting speaking events, like things are just feeding themselves. And that was just a memorable statement you made last time we talked. And
Yeah, for sure. It kind of feels like the reverse hurricane right now. Yeah, it's interesting, man. I mean, I agree with that, and yeah, and I think sometimes natural hurricanes are gonna come that you have no control over, and are gonna blow, and you've just got to focus on what you can control, and you've got to let go of the things that you can't control.
right.
Such an interesting time to be talking about hurricanes.
Yeah, it's like you had a hurricane before, now I guess hurricanes come and go, and if you think of hurricane as a good thing, then now the hurricane's sort of fading just with the climate of everything.
Yeah, and I mean the greatest part about it is that nothing is constant, and so I mean like everything's gonna. I mean I think like we kind of talked about this beforehand, but I think what's going on in the world, I think it's gonna be much better for us in the long run. Um, so I don't really have any like I'm very grateful, and hurricanes come and go, and so I think as long as you're focusing on like what's the most important thing, um, then you'll be good. But again, like you can't be focusing on what you can't control. And so I think you also need to understand the concept of seasons too. Like so for example, like I was working on my book for like the last 6 months, And I did some speaking, but not really. I was just sort of hibernating and just kind of doing it. And my plan was to come out in March. And I had so many events lined up. I had a TEDx talk lined up. I had like an infinite amount of things. And so basically, like over the course of 48 hours, like I'm sure a lot of us, um, a lot of things changed. And so I think I'm grateful to be in the position where I am. And I still think there's a hurricane going. Just maybe it just slows down. Maybe it just, it blew off to the side, but it's still moving. And so, yeah, I think as long as that sort of happens, then I think we're good.
Okay. And so we talked briefly before this, but you talked about how, well, you were surprised I didn't have access to LinkedIn Live, and you've been one of the early people to get access to LinkedIn Live, but you have yet to use it. So, is that something that you're
Got me
planning?
out here.
Yeah, yeah. I think that I think it's good. You've got an opportunity sitting right in front of you, especially with the climate of everything, and with
Yeah.
how much engagement you get on your LinkedIn page. I think that maybe if you're not getting these speaking events right now, jumping on LinkedIn Live, you're just getting FaceTime live with people that you can engage with. I think that you're sitting on something there.
Dude, I'm totally gonna do it, man. I have some time today in my schedule. I'm gonna live stream, bro. I promise. I'll
All
let you
right.
know how it goes.
Yeah, I'll tune in on it.
Awesome.
So as far as I guess since we're in these times right now, and a lot of conferences are getting canceled,
Everything's
things,
getting canceled, bro.
yeah,
Everything.
everything's getting canceled. What are some things that you're thinking about as far as your next steps now that you have this extra time and extra bandwidth to figure out what
Yeah, man.
strategies?
So yes, I mean, just right now, what I'm thinking about is, nobody knows how long the world is going to be in lockdown for. Some people say 2 weeks, which I highly doubt. I think it's going to be more of like 1 month. If you look at the average pandemic, it lasts 3 months. And so yeah, I mean, I just came back from New York last week, and they're thinking of doing what San Francisco did, which is shelter in place. And so I assume that's going to happen all over the world as this storm blows over. And so honestly, what I'm thinking about is the increasing importance and value that um, that that the internet is going to have, because I think the whole world has already been moving towards a more digital way because it's just easier than the physical world. And so I feel like after this, we're going to look at it completely differently. And so because of that, I'm just trying to think about what should I just kind of build. And so honestly, like I'm grateful that like a lot of the things that I was already doing, kind of similar to you, were already gearing me up to do that pretty well. And so, I'm not too damaged right now. Like I haven't lost a ton of money or anything like that. Everyone I know is safe, happy, and healthy. And so that's one thing that I'm thinking about. And then I'm also thinking about my book in terms of I wrote this book on being shy, being socially anxious, maybe being a little bit too introverted. And now, thank you. And now it's like everyone is socially isolating themselves. And so it's just quite frankly a really weird time, man. And I'm just trying to figure it out. And I think like as long as you set your values right, like as long because like there's a lot of people freaking out right now and they're making rash, impulsive decisions. And the matter of the fact is like 10 years from now, they're gonna look back at that and be like, wow, like I really treated people like crap because I was afraid. Like I'm sure like you, like I've had a lot of people be maybe rude or stressed out to me or whatever. And that's just because the world is a chaotic place right now. And so for me, I'm just trying to focus back on those values and being like, all right, I need to make sure that I'm the person that I want to be like 5 years from now when I'm looking back at this, or 10 years from now if I have kids and they ask me like, dude, like, hey dad, what'd you do during the pandemic? Am I going to really tell them that like I hoarded toilet paper or like I made the wrong business decisions because I was scared or whatever? And so that's something that I'm thinking about too. And then also it's just giving me the importance of just like online connectivity. And so I'm in the middle of right now, I'm trying to launch a like a virtual podcast mastermind Starting from next week, I'm going to start to make this book into a course that people can do. And so I think that's just what it's heading towards, just more online ecosystems. And then whether it's 3 months from now or 6 months from now, or whoever knows, then you can take those things and like transmute them into whether it's an event or an in-person mastermind. And so that's sort of what I'm focused on right now. And then of course, like trying to plug the book. And so it's like such a weird time because like I'm facing a lot of success with the book, but then it's also like the world is shutting down and what's actually happening. And so, yeah, it's a really weird time, man. I don't really know how to process it. I'm still in the middle of processing it yet. So
Yeah, I feel you. I actually I had a meetup scheduled here locally, and so I canceled it, but I am converting it to a virtual meetup just with a Zoom call, and so I'm doing that tonight. So I'll see how that goes. But I think like virtual meetups, virtual communities, that's going to be a big movement that's picking. It's already been like in its progress to moving in that direction, but this is sort of just like exponentially speeding that up.
yeah, that's exactly it, man. And I think another thing too is like this is making more people realize the importance of their health. And so like no, I mean nobody exactly knows yet, but they're basically saying that if you're a healthy person and you get corona, you should be basically fine. But if you have underlying health conditions like obesity is a big one, diabetes, you're more likely to get hurt from it more. And so I also hope that this time also just makes people realize how serious their health really needs to be. Because I want to be honest with you, man, like we've had it so good, even despite like the issues in the world, but like we've gotten so spoiled, we've gotten so like out of touch with our human reality that when a pandemic or when a disease comes that has been happening throughout human history, of course we see it as a threat, as we should, but then people are freaking out and it's like, no, this is what it's like to be a living creature on planet Earth in the middle of space that's just circling around. And so I think it's also going to help us root us between that, because like a common theme I talk about in my book, a common theme I talk about, that many authors talk about is this separation between the natural environment that our brain has been evolving in for thousands of years, and then now, like the last 100 years, basically, we've just like completely changed our lifestyles. We've made cities, we've made foods that didn't exist before. We've done so much, and so I think just biochemically speaking, with nature and the environment, that's been causing a lot of problems in the world. And so I hope Corona wakes us up. And then when you even look at it, I mean, I don't know how many people have died from Corona yet, but I'm not trying to say this to undermine the seriousness of this at all. But I believe like 9,000 people have died from Corona, and yet every year 11 million people die from diseases related to a bad diet. And so I'm not saying that to undermine the issue, but it's just like, I hope this can kick us into like what actually matters,
Right.
And so that's what I'm thinking about too.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, people need to care a lot more about their health so that they can withstand occurrences like this, but also if the risk is higher with having a bad health, having the self-awareness around that, that's huge.
Yeah.
So can we talk a little bit about your book? And
Yeah.
you've got this podcast, where you're leveling up just mindset, and you talk a lot about health. You talk a lot about how you've overcome sharing. Last time you were on here as a guest, you shared some of the strategy you used. I remember liking the one strategy where you'd go up to a random person in the street and ask them for directions, and then you just kept building up your confidence with in-person interactions. So like you've overcome a lot from being shy. So you've got this book called Screw Being Shy. Can you just maybe tell us a little bit about it, or maybe some insights that you've shared in the book?
Yeah, for sure. So honestly, I kind of look at mental health from um, a science-based perspective. And although I think exposure therapy, which is what you just said, is awesome, I definitely don't think that's the first step, because I recall back to my journey when I was like really having a tough time. um, really having a tough time with my social anxiety, and I was like just sort of beginning to realize it. I remember I tried to walk outside and try to talk to people, and in turn, what happened was I feel like I actually got kind of more stressed. And so for me, I kind of had to go back to I had to go back to really like the fundamentals of my health. And so when you look at mental health from a science-based perspective, essentially like what runs our lives are a series of neurotransmitters and biochemical secretions firing off in our brain that help take information from our eyes, ears, our past memories, fears, experiences, and project and create the reality that we all experience on a moment to moment basis. And so when you look at those neurotransmitters, a key neurotransmitter comes up, especially in the mental health community, called serotonin. And serotonin is it has to do with a wide variety of various issues, or not issues, various functions in the body, from our appetite to our regulating our mood, sexual desire, sleep, a lot of different things. And so for most of science, people thought that um, because it's a neurotransmitter, most of it is all in your brain. And so it turns out that's actually not true. And only 5-10% of serotonin is in your brain. The rest of it is in this thing called your gut microbiome, which is an ecosystem of trillions of bacteria that have existed for thousands of years, that have formed a symbiotic relationship with human beings, that have basically made us the number one species on this planet. And so like whenever we eat something, our gut microbiome actually digests it first, because our human body can't digest it, and then it passes it off to our human stomach. And so 95% of serotonin is happening in the gut microbiome. The two biggest sources of dysfunction in your gut microbiome that are going to either make it malfunction and produce too much serotonin or too little serotonin, number one is psychological trauma, and then number two is your food. And so I kind of talk about this in the beginning of the book, of like the first chapter, of like, what is the root cause of someone not even just having social anxiety, but facing any kind of mental health issue. And for the most part, it's psychological trauma. And so for me, when I was 10, 11, I went to a school where nobody looked like me, in a small town for 5,000 people. My parents immigrated from Egypt, and this was the time of post 9/11. And so for me, I faced really severe racism, bullying. I also came down with some physical health issues like asthma, ADD, appendix, issues with my sleep, skin, bladder. And so for me, a major part of that was just realizing the damage that psychological trauma had done on my nervous system. And then number two, the food. And so food is probably the bigger like deviation of control that someone can take control of, just by what they put on their fork and what they put in their mouth. And so if you eat anything that comes from a factory, has been made by scientists, anything that's like brightly colored, artificial, has preservatives, whenever you're at the grocery store and you flip over the box and there are ingredients that you don't recognize, that stuff is toxic for your body. And so that can have varying side effects depending on the person, depending on what they consume. I mean, there are studies in the UK that show children who consume a lot of candy and junk food that has these dyes, these artificial dyes, like red 6, yellow 5. If you ever like turn over the package, you'll see them, that literally cause ADD. And so if you look at, for example, the European Union, there's actually over 100 ingredients that are banned for food manufacturers to use in Europe. But yet, if you go to any American supermarket, they're all there. And so that is causing an insane amount of damage that, quite frankly, a lot of people don't know. A lot of people say, oh, yeah, you got to eat healthy, but they don't really think about it. And so, quite frankly, what I found is it's much easier whether someone has social anxiety or has some other mental health issue, because there's this dysfunction with serotonin, to rather get them to stop putting the wrong things in their mouth and start putting the right things in their mouth, than rather telling them to go out there and like, hey, go conquer your biggest fear out there. And what happens is when someone starts to eat healthy and their body starts to be less stressed and anxious because they're giving it the right kinds of nutrients and fats and vitamins, then what happens is it's much easier to tackle your fear at a biochemical level now that you've established yourself at a health level. And so this is massive. And so I go hard in this in the book, and I break down all the science from clinical studies done by psychologists and neuroscientists. And it's truly baffling how much actual verifiable science there is around this to prove what I'm saying. And yet most of the world has no idea.
Yeah, I mean, that's huge. I mean, to think about overcoming a fear using the biochemical levels that you're talking about, I think that's a take that not a lot of people are talking about, because there's so much that you can do for doing putting yourself out there and practicing to speak more, to overcome your shyness and the barriers that come with that. But if you're not putting your body in a good position to be the core of that, that's an awesome perspective.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, this is the way that I think about it. It's software and then it's hardware. Okay. And so software is like, software is your mindset, your beliefs, your thoughts, maybe even your motivations. Hardware is everything that the software runs on. And so I make this analogy in my book and I say, like, let's say you got the best software from Apple. You got the newest version of iOS, whatever they're on, iOS 15, or I have no idea. And you're trying to take that perfect software and you're trying to install that on like an iPhone 2 or like an iPhone 3 that's super outdated and slow and can barely run. I mean, listen, dude, you could be sitting there for a long time and keep trying to hit that install button, and maybe error messages will pop up, but you'll just keep trying to do it. And I'm sure that's better than doing nothing, but it's super, super important. And so like, it's so important for that aspect. I hope that example made sense.
That made a lot of sense. Actually, I wrote it down and posted it. So software is your mindset, beliefs, thoughts, and motivations. Hardware is everything the software runs on.
Boom.
Yeah, that was awesome.
That's it. And then like also it's like, hey, if you go too heavy in either side, I think you're gonna have issues, right? And so I think if you're, I talk about this in the book and I say, like, listen, it's still very much possible to hate your life while you're eating all the kale and all the broccoli in the world. And so I think, and then also like, hey, if you are just trying to focus on reading books and listening to podcasts, but yet you're not doing anything to integrate them, you're not doing anything to build that into your hardware, your default mode, like you're just not going to get that far. And for me, like, I mean, I don't really have social anxiety anymore. I mean, I think for sure it's definitely still there, but it's gone from like it having 99% control over my life to now maybe having like 1 to 5% control over my life at any given moment. And I think a real part as to like why I haven't, and quite frankly, ever since my rock bottom, haven't really been seriously depressed or extremely anxious. For sure, I have my bad moments and bad weeks for sure, like everyone, but I haven't really had an issue. And I really do believe it's because I focus super hard on my biochemistry. I make sure I sleep for 8 hours a night. I make sure I exercise, I stretch, I meditate, which is massive. Meditation is essentially how you begin to integrate both the software and hardware together. It's either that or therapy. And so, there's a lot of things I break down in the book, but ultimately it's like I break down the root cause, because I think that's so important, because I think any book that tries to tackle a problem without addressing a root cause is just not worth reading. Number 2 is I break down like the neuroscience behind what actually makes life. And then number 3, I go into like, how can you actually be motivated rather than just reading a book and be motivated for 2 days, but how do you actually build this into your life? Number 4, I go into the biochemistry as someone's biggest starting leverage point, who has a lot of these fears and who does want to transform their mental health. And then the rest, I go into like learning how to be a human being. I break down social skills, how to navigate conversations, how to not overthink, how to expose yourself, and then I even go into like social media and entrepreneurship. If you're shy and you're an entrepreneur, or you work at a company and you're trying to navigate that with your introverted employees. And so, yeah, I mean, I really tried my best with this book, and I know it's not perfect for sure, because it's my first book, right? You got to keep taking shots.
Right.
But quite frankly, man, I wanted to release this book as soon as possible, and I didn't want to push the release date back because, I was suicidal for one time. And when I was doing my research for this book and looking at the data, social anxiety is one of the most common anxiety issues in America. And out of all of them, social anxiety is the most correlated with substance abuse and social isolation, both of which are tightly correlated to suicide, which kills 850,000 people every year. And so to me, I'm like, this is just my attempt to help someone guide themselves out of like this really serious issue that, quite frankly, no one really understands from the outside. So people don't understand what the difference is between an introvert or being normally shy, or being really shy, or having social anxiety. And so, yeah, man, this is my attempt to kind of lay out that guide and lay out that plan for the world for anyone who wants to learn and do better.
Yeah, I mean that's amazing. I mean your why is very clear, and the book, the purpose of the book, I'm sure is going to make a giant impact as it gets into more people's hands. Speaking of, you may, I don't know if you've heard any unintended consequences as a result of your book yet, because it's so new. But have you heard anything from people that have read the book and maybe the impact that it's made on them already? And if not, then maybe we can talk about a few from your podcast.
Yeah, no, for sure. I've already gotten a ton. Honestly, I've gotten so many I haven't even processed it yet. I'm like trying to remember. Um, yeah, I mean, I think honestly, like the biggest part is this. So I think like a lot of people who are introverted and quiet and shy and whatnot have read my book. And I think the biggest piece of takeaway is like, oh my God, this is actually a real thing. And so a lot of people, like, for example, I didn't know I had social anxiety when I was going through it for a decade. And so a lot of people are going through like this mental matrix prison inside of their own head, and they don't think anyone else can relate. They don't think that anyone else actually knows what's happening, and they don't think it's normal, in the sense of like, when I was going through this as a kid and I didn't even know I had social anxiety, I just thought that there was something like inherently wrong with me. I thought I was some like moral failure. And so that's the biggest thing that people have told me. People are like, oh my God, like I'm not a moral failure. Like this is actually a biochemical equation, not just biochemistry, but this is an equation that I can begin to move the inputs on and then actually change the output of my life. And so I think the fact that people are resonating with it by it giving them language of things that they've just always thought about, but then now actually tells them what to do after based on science, that's probably the biggest piece of feedback that I've gotten. And then also I had someone reach out to me who was seriously depressed because they had social anxiety and they were socially isolating themselves, and tell me that like when they started to read my book, they just started to cry and feel a lot of emotions that they haven't felt before. And so who knows what's going to happen, but yeah, I mean, I think for me, like when I was writing this book, it was really tricky in terms of my head, because I was like, first off, I know people are going to just totally shit on me because I'm a 22-year-old who wrote a book on a pretty complex topic. And so I wanted to make sure it was like scientifically sound, and it's not just like my anecdotal story. It's actually based on like real verifiable evidence, which it is. And so I've yet to see a bad review or someone tell me anything. I mean, I'm always trying to get feedback. I'm already working on the second edition of my book now, because there's things that I've already like tackled and whatnot. And so yeah. And so my main intention for doing this was like, my goal is to make one person help one person's life. And then number two is like, I kind of wrote this book for myself. I kind of wrote this book for like the 12-year-old version of myself that I wish I could have just like handed to them and they could read it and not and help them not waste time and help them actually figure it out. And so yeah, it's been really interesting, man, especially when you're 22 years old and you come out with a book. It's like a lot in here and what are people going to think and whatnot. And so, yeah, that was like a whole part of the game that I think I'm over now, but that was a big thing for me like last month in February. So, yeah, it's
Wow.
interesting. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I mean that's amazing that you've heard so much so soon. I mean, I'm looking on Amazon now, and it's saying that it's publication date of March 10th, and it's March 19th right now, so it's 9 days into your book being available on Amazon at least, right?
Yeah, so that actually messed up. So the actual release date of the book was 3 days later, March 13th.
Okay,
Um,
so we're less
but
than a week into your book being out.
Yeah, no, less than a week. Like it's literally been like 5, 6 days.
Yeah,
Um,
I,
so yeah, it's been really interesting. But yeah, I'm really grateful. It's been well received. I've had authors and people who I've read their books and I look up to, um, leave amazing reviews for my book, like Daniel Pink, and a lot of other people I really respect. And so yeah, dude, it's
that's
it's
amazing. I
really
mean,
interesting.
I'm just imagining, if you're getting that much right now, where you'll be, 6 months from now, and like how much influx of things you're going to hear and impact that you're going to have as a result of that book. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, so for sure, man. That's why I'm not upset. And ultimately, like again, like I nobody I know is unhealthy or sick or infected or anything like that. And so I feel like as long as you can just make sure like the most important things in your life are good, then like you just focus on what you can control. And like literally every single hour this week, not every hour, but mostly every hour that I've had, I'm just trying to promote the book as much as possible. So it's just like just trying to put in that work, and then also realizing that maybe the book is doing better than it normally would because of what's happening in the world. And then also maybe the book is doing worse because of what's happening in the world. I don't really know. And so
Right.
at the end of the day, I'm just going to focus on my inputs, what I can do. And then whatever happens, happens, whether it's a month, 2 months, 6 months, like you said. But I totally agree with you. I think I think this is going to be amazing.
Yeah, I'm excited for you. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Uh, so if you don't mind me drilling into a little bit, I'd like to maybe get some tips and tricks for people to gain their influence and gain their reach, especially in this time. And I know that you're an avid LinkedIn poster. You've got a LinkedIn course for helping
Yes.
people learn LinkedIn. Do you mind talking a little bit about someone who's newer to LinkedIn, maybe they haven't really posted much, and how they can approach just sort of getting more active on there, and some strategies they could use.
Yeah, so definitely check out my course. If you go to my website, Mark Metry, MarkMetry.com, it should be one of the tabs there. You can check it out. Um, had a lot of great news from people. I had someone tell me he was technically unemployed, but then he started like his own business, started freelancing. He told me he took my LinkedIn course and he made like $4,000 over the weekend. He was like, that was the most amount of money I've ever made. And so, yeah, the course is great. Recommend people to check it out. But honestly, I mean, I think LinkedIn is special than all the other social media platforms because um, LinkedIn is one in terms of the content side, it's new. And so it's much easier to build a following on there if you're focused on the right ideas and themes than for the most part any other platform. Two, the entire business world is on there. CEOs, heads of HR, everyone is on there. And so when it comes to like integrating LinkedIn with your business, I mean, it's a killer strategy. I mean, I've seen people literally make like hundreds of millions of dollars from integrating LinkedIn into their strategy. And so, um, that's it. And then honestly, like what I would say is like, I mean, I could drop 1,000 tips, but quite honestly, as I would say, is I just go to my LinkedIn, my name, my first and last name.com, Mark Metry, and just look at how I'm posting, look at what I'm doing. And if you do that, try to copy it like in your own style. That'll really show you. But yeah, I mean, I would not be sleeping on LinkedIn at all. It's I think overall, I had someone count it the other day. I think overall my views, my total posts on LinkedIn have gotten like 200 million views, some crazy
Wow.
thing like that. Saved me so much money in advertising. I think like the reason why my book is doing so well is because I've been promoting the crap out of it on LinkedIn. And so yeah, I think LinkedIn, if you go hard on LinkedIn, um, I think for sure you can I think for sure you can do this with other social media platforms, but um, it could potentially totally help you grow a business. It could help you save a ton of money on paid advertising, so much. Um, so yeah, LinkedIn I would not be sleeping on by the slightest.
Awesome. Uh, so what's you're going through this time where things are slowing down, but you've just launched this book. You're thinking about doing the course for the book. You talked a little bit about what you're trying to do in the short midterm time frame. But what is your how far out are you looking when you're thinking about all this? What's your how far do you think when you're thinking of your vision, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I have like some dream fantasy in my head of like my life's vision, but honestly, I have no idea. I mean, I think the world changes every year, and so I don't really make like real tangible concrete goals past a year for that reason. But but honestly, man, I'm just like, whatever happens happens. Like, I don't know what's going to happen in the world. For all we know, like, again, I have no idea what's going to happen, but for all we know, let's
Yeah.
say like the world permanently shuts down. Like, let's say this becomes like a doom or die scenario. Amazon is just like delivering everything to us in our homes. No one can leave. Maybe we're all going to live in virtual reality. I have no idea. And so I think like I just have some core foundations, which are like mental health, psychological well-being, transformation, um, entrepreneurship, and how that correlates with mental health. Because I think as entrepreneurs, a lot of us are trying to solve all of our problems with money, when the reality is that's just not the case. And I've had people on my podcast. I had someone on my podcast come on and tell me that he had $750 million in his bank account, and yet he was going to kill himself. And so I think just after seeing all these things time and time again and my own life, that's what I'm focusing on. And so if that looks like a podcast, if that looks like a book, a course, that looks like speaking engagements, if that looks like a virtual reality program, like I'm just going to keep going, man. And whatever happens, happens. And yeah, I mean, I think if anything, the last couple weeks has taught us that. Because I don't know about you, but I didn't see any of this coming. Like
Right.
I like when I first heard of Corona in like maybe January, February, I honestly made fun of people who took it seriously. I was like, oh, come on, man. It's like, it's the same thing with all these other diseases that happen every year. And it's very much not the case. And so, yeah, I think this has really taught us that, like we think we're so cool. Like we think we're like, we can change the world, and we can for sure, but also we need to get humbled, And so I think that's taught me the most. And so whatever that looks like, I have no idea.
Yeah. I like that. I mean, you have your vision, your beliefs system, and you just stick to that and let doors open and see where the world takes you.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah,
man.
I feel very aligned with that. So we're getting closer to running out of time. Before I open the floor for you to talk a little bit more about your stuff, which I'll link to everything to the show notes of this episode on the website whyinfluence.com. Knowing that a lot of the listeners here are either struggling to get started with sharing or are just starting sharing, and they're trying to grow their influence. You talked a lot about some of the strategies behind that earlier in the conversation, but do you have any last words for our listeners?
Yeah, I do. So I think it kind of goes back to what you did. And so what I mean is like, and so there's actually a chapter in my book. It doesn't talk about like branding or marketing, but it talks about if you're introverted or shy, how do you do stuff on social media? And so, I mean, for the sake of time, I'll just say one thing, and it's, don't pretend, like, don't think you have to do everything. Don't think you have to start a YouTube channel. Don't think you have to record yourself. Don't think you have to live stream. Maybe you're super shy, and maybe you're just a good writer. So just start writing, whether it's tweets or articles or a book or a document or a white paper, do that. Maybe you suck at writing and you don't want to go on video. Maybe you become the world's best photographer for this specific thing. I don't know. And so I think the biggest thing is like, go with the path of least resistance when it comes to marketing in terms of your communication method. Find a communication method, stick with it. That's comfortable for you. And then as time progresses, you might get more comfortable and then do what it is you're doing right now, which is video, live streaming, previous from the audio only podcast. And so that's what I would tell people. Just try to find the easiest thing that you could possibly do right now and then just stick with it. And then over time, that'll evolve.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I actually just talked to someone. He's got a podcast on for military veteran fathers, and he's started out doing a blog, and he built up doing extremely vulnerable blog posts where he's really getting vulnerable. So when he got to a point of starting his podcast, he's already used to sharing at that deep, vulnerable level, and that really was a essential core to having him be a great podcast host. So I think that finding the path of least resistance is a great strategy.
Yeah, of course. And then that's like that's the only time that I would say it. Like when it comes to your own personal life, do not take the path of least resistance. Taking the path of least resistance will make life a lot harder for you in the long run. And so that's the only case in which I'd say the path of least resistance.
Yeah. And I think that for me personally, I feel like if you are always right under the limit of your comfort zone, then you can always keep raising the limit of your comfort zone without going past it. And that's sort of the analogy I use for that is when I learned drifting. Like I've never spun out or crashed a car, but I can drift around a drift course because I would just ease into it more and more and more until I learned, the limits of a car by never passing the limits of the car.
Yeah, and I mean the matter of fact is that that's what all successful people do. And so like when I think back to my journey, like a lot of people want to romanticize and fantasize about like what change is. And people think like, like one of their parents has to die and like God has to talk to them or something like that. And it's like, no. Like you literally just wake up the day, make a decision, you do it, you slowly ease into it, like you said. And then you do that every single day. And then a year goes by and you're like, oh my God, I'm a completely different person. I've totally changed my life. Or 2 years or 3 years. And that's literally what it is, man. So I couldn't agree more with what you said.
Awesome. Well, I'll put links to everything on the show notes of the website, but you want to give a brief explanation of how people can find like the best way to connect with you and what you want them to do?
Yes, this is what I would say. If you want to connect with me, go to Amazon and go to my website, markmetry.com. Check out the book. That's the biggest thing I can tell people. The audiobook is going to come out in a week or two. And yeah, just check out the book. A percentage of the proceeds of the physical copy are going towards the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And yeah, I would just tell people to check out the book. And even if you're not anxious, even if you're not an introvert, I would still say check out the book because it also speaks on mental health in a broader term. And then if you have kids or anyone that you know, definitely shoot them this link or get them the book.
Awesome. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Go buy the book. I bought it, so I'm looking forward to looking through it.
Dude,
but yeah, you can find you can find more about this episode on my website, winefluence.com. And thanks for tuning in today, Mark. Thank you so much for taking the time to come here, share with us. You're always dropping tons of value when we chat.
Dude, our audience enjoyed it. Thank you, everyone out there, for listening, and go check out the book.